So recently Nikon dropped some huge news that we all were expecting, but honestly weren't expecting to happen this soon. And they announced their Z-mount RED cameras, the Red Komodo X and V Raptor X Z-mount. And there's so much to unpack. It's confusing and exciting at the same time. And as a current RF Komodo X owner who's been thinking about getting a V Raptor X at some point, I have a lot of thoughts about this, and it's exciting, but also just one of those things where I don't really know how the future will play out or what I'm gonna do as time goes on. So yeah, let's talk about this new announcement and just the future of RED and Nikon. So when Nikon dropped this news, they had in their copy that the Red Komodo X and V Raptor X Z-mount were a part of the first entry into their new Z Cinema series. And that's the first thing that caught my eye because, like, naturally, yeah, you think with the RED acquisition that Nikon did, like, not too long ago. I made a video about that if you want to check that out. Like, we knew that they'd be taking the technology from RED, but I didn't think that they would move into Z-mount this soon, because now that allows this transition for people to jump into the Z-mount from the current RF mount, or if people have Nikon cameras but don't have a RED, now they can buy a RED that matches up with their Z-mount stuff. But I wasn't really expecting them just to like keep RED side by side. And that's what's starting to seem like right now with the phrasing that they have about the new Z Cinema series. But there's a second part of that sentence structure, I guess, that really dials it in for me. And it's that these two cameras are a co-produced line of solutions from Nikon and RED. And that just screams to me that Nikon is going to keep Nikon, and Nikon's going to keep RED. And as a current RED owner, this is exciting because RED has been making really incredible cameras over the years, and they currently are making incredible cameras over the years for solo operators, small crews, medium-sized teams to freaking high-level stuff. Like, that was my main concern, is that Nikon's just gonna like completely gut out RED, take all the tech and all of their stuff in R3D, throw it in a Nikon, and just like toss the carcass of RED to the curb. And they could do that at some point, but as of right now, it seems like this is the initial stage of like integrating the cinema line into Nikon and have Nikon be like a top dog name in the cinema conversation next to the likes of Sony, Arri, RED, and maybe Canon. It's exciting because RED has insane technology, but they also have just like the camera builds and everything encompassed in that. And I absolutely love my Komodo X, and it's been a fantastic camera. I still need to make my 1-year review about it and probably do that soon before things get a little crazy. But it's really cool because Nikon's able to have RED, bring people in through that front, but then also be able to make their Nikon customers happy and have a really solid A/B setup. So you might be wondering, why did Nikon move the REDs into the Z-mount? And for starters, it makes sense because Nikon bought RED, and now they want to have those cinema cameras fill in the gap while they're making their own cinema cameras, most likely. And it allows current Nikon shooters to jump into the cinema line of RED, and they can start making Nikon cinema lenses and start building up this whole foundation of cinema users during the time that they're researching and developing their own cinema cameras. That's at least my theory. Who knows if Nikon will ever make cinema cameras, and if they don't, it could probably just live under the RED name, but then like they're calling the shots because they own it. But the Z-mount opens up so many new features just outside of being a part of the Nikon ecosystem. There's improved autofocus. It's the shortest flange distance in the entire camera sphere, where because it's so shallow, one, the autofocusing I heard is a lot better because there's less distance between the sensor and the lens. But you can mount so many different lenses to the Z-mount. You can do Nikon Z-mount, of course, and have it native. You can do Nikon F-mount, Sony E, Leica M, Fuji X, EF, PL, and I've heard mixed reviews that RF can be adapted or not. And you can also do tons of other vintage mounts like Leica R, M42, Canon FD, Pentax. There are endless possibilities with the Z-mount, more so compared to RF and E and L. Having that really short flange distance is just really nice for when you're running a variety of different lenses. The native lens conversation is different with RED because they've notoriously been pretty bad with autofocus and the manual focusing experience. And if you're looking for that kind of workflow with native lenses, you're mostly looking at Canon and Sony and maybe Lumix. And with Sony, you know you're gonna be getting the best autofocus performance when you're running native lenses on native sensors. And that's the crazy thing with this Nikon Z-mount, because now you get the Nikon autofocus tech paired up with the Nikon lenses that are insanely sharp and beautiful and have really good autofocus performance. Once you pair up those two things and you toss it on a RED camera that also has new firmware that is always being updated and has that Nikon F mount that now has that tech, it just makes it a much more versatile run and gun camera compared to the RF mount that lacks a lot of those beneficial features. And with the Nikon Z mount, we have a massive library of incredible lenses, and they have a lot of beautiful telephoto lenses and primes and zooms, and we also have the customization of autofocusing and manual focus. You could change the focus direction, so it's not like the weird opposite way that Nikon does it. You could switch it back and forth. You could change the focus speeds, iris control, and there's tons of different custom buttons involved in it. And the Z mount is just like a really high-tech version of E and RF. And I feel like E is like right up there with Nikon Z, but for some reason Nikon is just doing some crazy things with Z mount. So you might be wondering, why is the Canon RF mount that bad? One, it's a pretty dead-end ecosystem outside of Canon cinema cameras. Canon completely just squashed all the third-party companies from utilizing their autofocus with RF lenses. If you look at the Sony E mount, there are Tamron and Sigma and whatever other companies that are making really solid native E lenses that have autofocus capabilities alongside the Sony E lenses, like the G Masters and G and whatever else they have. And Sony's smart for doing this because now they're able to have a whole wide range of customers that have different budget needs and requirements, because not everyone's going to drop $3,000 a lens or $2,000 a lens on their G Masters. People can afford $700 to $1,000 and like stretch their budgets to get a really solid Sigma. So there's that aspect of it, but more importantly, these RF lenses are awful to work with on the Komodo and Raptor. The manual focusing is focus by wire, and it's super squirrely and loose, and it's not fun to pull focus on. Whereas on the Canon C70, because it's native RF to RF and also it's Canon, they have a setting in there called linear manual focusing, and it essentially creates your photo lens to focus like a cinema lens. And that feature made shooting on the C70 so nice because I can go between autofocus and manual focus, but that feature is completely missing on the Red cameras. And you would think that they'd be able to do that in a firmware update for the current RF cameras, but that might be a weird thing that Canon's putting on Red, that if you want those features, you need to buy the Canon cameras. And alongside that, the autofocus is like pretty decent. Like it's okay, like it's better than the Komodo OG and previous Reds. And then the Canon cameras rely heavily on lens correction, so distortion, chromatic aberrations, and I think focus breathing and stuff. I know like those are pretty much built into the Canon cameras, and if you run it on a camera shooting complete raw, you'll probably be pretty bummed with the vignetting and the chromatic aberrations and the distortion that is there when it's not being corrected in camera. So yeah, there's a lot of implications there. For most people, we're adapting to EF or PL, or we're using like RF cinema lenses like my Fujinon MK1855. And because of all that, it's exciting that Nikon is doing the Z mount with the Komodo, because now you could run so many more different lenses, and I'm sure the Nikon Z lenses will run really, really well, especially now having the manual focus control and all that. For people that are shooting with Nikon mirrorless bodies, it'll make sense to now have a Komodo or a Raptor as like your main cinema camera, because now you can use both cameras back and forth, and you can also just use one ecosystem of lenses. Whereas for most people like myself, I have my Sony camera and my E lenses, and then I have my Komodo with whatever lenses I get my hands on. So yeah, there's so much there, and we're gonna get more into that later in this video. There are a couple like guidelines when it comes to the Z mount. It's only available for the Komodo X and the Raptor X. Right now it's not shipping for the Raptor XL or the Komodo OG. So to actually get the Z mount, there are two different avenues, or I guess three, that you could do. If you are looking to buy a new camera, you can buy the Komodo X and Raptor X in either RF or Z mount for the same exact price, which is actually insane that they're doing that, because there are so many more features in the Z mount compared to RF. Or if you're a current RF owner for those two cameras, you can do a mount swap where you pick your week, you send it into Red. It's about 7 to 10 days. It's about $1,600 for the Komodo X and $1,700 for the Raptor. And then now you have a Z mount on your camera. That is interesting because it's a lot cheaper than I thought it would be. I thought the conversion would be around $3,000, where I'm like, screw that, like I don't need that. But at $1,600 for the Komodo X, like that's not that bad. But they did drop the price $3,000 from when I first bought the camera. even though I bought mine on sale. For people who bought the camera full price at 10 grand, now it's shipping for 7. That extra price tag like starts to like make the camera even more expensive, even though these cameras depreciate a lot. So there's something to be considered there too. And then there's a third bonus way to be able to get a Z mount, and that's through the Red trade-ins. So they brought the trade-in system back, and there's a handful of different tiers that you could choose from depending on what camera you have. The only bummer is that the trade-ins only work for the Raptor X like packages. So these things are super expensive. They're like 40 grand, and it's tough because you can't trade in for a Komodo X. So you just have to sell your camera and then buy a Komodo X, which kind of makes sense. But you could trade in your Raptor Super 35, Raptor VV, non-X, because they only do the upgrade for the X. And then you can also trade in your DSMC 1 and 2 cameras and then jump straight into the Raptor. So there's a handful of different options there. And you can buy the cameras brain only or through the packages. And there's also a new package that Red is offering. It's called the Power Zoom Pack. And this is super exciting because before Nikon announced the Red Z mounts, they dropped, I think 1 or 2 days before, their new cinema lens, and it's their PZ 28-135 f4. And this is definitely the first of many lenses to come, especially with their announcement of the Z Cinema series. They definitely have to be working on some insane cinema lenses that will probably come out in the next couple years or hopefully sooner. And it's cool that Red is offering this lens in a package to buy, because on the Raptor, that thing is going to be absolutely killer because that focal range is really solid. Even the Komodo 28 at a 1.33 crop isn't too bad either. That lens is going to do really well, and I think it's going to be the first marker of an insane cinema series. And this is really exciting because when you're looking at like the top dogs, no one's really making like insane cinema lenses at like a lower budget level. Canon's kind of like right there. Sony, I don't really think, I guess they have the Cine Alta lenses. Arri has really expensive lenses, and being able to have photo lens pricing of like 2 to 3 grand, even up to 5 grand, but have like the native capabilities of a photo lens and a cinema body, like it's just gonna change the game completely. And for the people that are shooting on Nikon, it's definitely going to be the main choice if they're going to be buying cinema lenses. Like it makes sense to buy a Z mount cinema lens that could work on your Z8, Z9, Z6, and also your new Red Z mount. So yeah, there's a lot to be looking forward to in the future, and it's super exciting. So now we need to talk about adapters. And as a Red Komodo X RF owner and someone who's been using the Red Raptor RF mount quite frequently, there are so many solid third-party adapters that are on the market, from Kippertie to Breakthrough to the Canon adapters, and even like the Red PL mounts that bolt into the camera that are super expensive. There are so many solid adapters that we've all grown accustomed to. And now that's starting to trickle into the Z mount. Like there's not really any amazing adapters. Like right now, Kippertie, I think, announced a PL to Z mount Revolva. I don't know if they'll do the Strata to Z mount. I don't know if they'll do an EF to Z mount Revolva. And Breakthrough has their EF and PL to RF adapters, and they definitely should be making an EF and PL to Z mount because those adapters are super popular on Red currently. I haven't really seen any solid Canon adapters, and it kind of makes sense because Canon, EF and RF, like those are Canon, and Canon going from EF to Z doesn't really make sense. So I'm sure like Earth and NovaFlex and Metabones will be making EF to Z mount, so that'll be really nice to have. And Red, of course, has their Z to PL and then the EV&D version, but those are way too expensive, and I personally would rather have the Kippertie. Unless I had unlimited budget, then the Red ones are super solid. So with this announcement, it made me really happy that I didn't invest into the Kippertie Revolva or Breakthrough RF mount, just on the off chance that I upgraded to Z mount. So that's the one bummer about buying really expensive proprietary adapters. So your miles may vary. Like right now, if you want like really solid rear ND, you're either gonna have to go Kippertie PL to Z mount, or just buy an RF mount camera and get any of the number of really solid and tried and true adapters that are on the market. So the big elephant in the room for someone like me who has a Komodo X and a Sony FX3 and also wants an FX6 or like is gonna wait for the FX6 Mark II. My main question is, will Sony lenses work at maybe 90% capacity of how they are on Sony bodies? And I'm talking autofocus. Is the autofocus reliable and snappy? And do I have full customization from just how fast it is and the subject shift and face tracking? Is manual focusing really nice? Right now, manual focusing on the FX3 and FX6 is really nice on these GM2 lenses because they have a built-in linear motor. So will we have that linear motor capability through adapters through the Z-mount? Will I be able to adjust my iris ring and custom buttons, because these lenses have custom buttons built in that I use all the time for various different things with focusing? And another weird thing is that will the Z-mount support lens corrections for my Sony lenses? Because again, like the RF lenses, these lenses kind of rely on lens corrections inside of these bodies. And I've heard natively just raw without corrections, these lenses are kind of like meh. But with the corrections, like they perform really well. And I haven't had really any issues on my FX3. So if my red has given me an identical performance from my FX3 to the Z-mount reds, it's like, I'm gonna wanna use these lenses even more so, because like I didn't want to use RF lenses on my camera, but now that I have the opportunity to run really solid native photo lenses, like they're lightweight, they're fast, and if the autofocus is really reliable and you could switch between manual and auto and have a good experience with both, it makes sense to have a bunch of lenses that are like that in your kit. And that is definitely the kicker that would make me want to upgrade into the Z-mount. If these Sony E lenses are really, really solid, no brainer. Because now my lenses go even further than just the Sony cameras that I have. But we're gonna talk more about that in a bit. So with the Z-mount edition for these red cameras, you're being adopted into the Nikon Z-mount ecosystem. And now the red Komodo X and the Raptor X finally have a proper B and C camera ecosystem. Currently with the reds, like there's not really like a clear path for your B camera. Some people like me are doing the Sony route. Some people are doing the Fuji route or Lumix route. And some were ahead of the curve even before Nikon bought red and were doing the whole Nikon thing. And now it makes sense. Like you can have the Z6, Z8, and Z9 and have these amazing hybrid mirrorless cameras that are sharing the same mount system and the same lenses and have insane autofocus performance and insane image quality. And now you can pair them up and at least at the bare minimum have your lenses line up really well and be able to share lenses across the board instead of having to carry your photo lenses and your cinema lenses. And of course, there's still a time and place for cinema lenses, but for most people, like being able to have all of your lenses be shared across your bodies just makes a lot of sense. And the hard thing right now with the current lineup of RF cameras is that the Canon lineup just left a lot to be desired. The RF lenses were like they were really good on the Canon bodies, but they weren't good on the red bodies. And the lack of like a proper video focused cinema camera in a mirrorless body like the FX3 completely strip out all the photo features and just make it a solid workhorse video camera and give it C-Log2 internal. And I don't know, there were like weird quirks with that camera that made it hard for me to invest into. And now with this whole Nikon acquisition with red and Nikon moving right over to the Z-mount, I can only imagine that Nikon is going to be making their own FX3, which is super exciting because right now their mirrorless cameras are hybrid cameras. Like they're really good for video, but they still are missing some of those main things that I really love out of my FX3. And if Nikon made a Nikon FX3 to go alongside all of that, like that's going to absolutely crush. And that might just be like a pipe dream that may never happen, but that would definitely make a lot of cinema body owners really, really happy having a dedicated small like hybrid mirrorless video camera. And alongside that, Red Cine X platform now supports Nikon NRAW. So now you can have Nikon NRAW use the IPP2 RAW pipeline that R3D users are currently using. And this is wild because in the interim, while Nikon is probably prepping their cameras to get R3D internal, you're able to get pretty much identical image quality out of NRAW in these, I think the Z8 and Z9 mostly, maybe the Z6 has it too. And my buddy Nick Mitz, I'll leave a link to him down below. He's been ahead of the curve for so long with Nikon and Red, and he recently shared some stuff with me from a shoot with his Komodo X and Z9, and I couldn't tell what camera is what. And that like completely opened my eyes to potentially moving into Nikon because of how solid they are as an A/B setup, and I'm sure it's only going to get better from here on out. So the big question is, will I upgrade? And I don't know. I'm really excited about the whole just conversation and Z-mount as a whole. I am glad that I didn't invest in the Kippertie Revolva or break through DFM or any other of those like proprietary RF NDs. And it's tough because on one hand, I could see myself upgrading to Z mount, but on the other, it's like, I'm really happy with my Komodo X now. I'm not really using photo lenses on it currently, and that might just be because the RF lenses are so bad. And if the E-mount lenses work really well, like sure, like I'd be down to upgrade, but then it's like, am I gonna be using my E-mount lenses all the time on it? Probably not. Like I'm still gonna be using hopefully my vintage lenses, and like I want to invest into cinema zooms or cinema primes, and like I don't need a Z mount to adapt to PL and EF. Like I can already do that on my RF mount. And I don't really see myself investing into Nikon Z mount lenses unless Sony completely just like butchers everything and I need to find a new B camera to my Komodo. But that's not the case. I get hired out for Sony jobs all the time, and I don't want to have a Sony camera with Sony lenses and then a Nikon camera and then a Komodo Z mount and have Z mount lenses. Like it's already hard enough deciding on what lenses to use and investing in lenses. And like it's already hard enough having the Komodo X and the FX3 in that sense. Like I just don't want to do that again. But only if the E mount lenses work on the Z mount, if they work really well, will I give it a heavy consideration. So when I'm looking at my situation and I start pricing things out, if I were to upgrade, it starts adding up really quick. So first off, it'll be $1,600 plus shipping and tax to upgrade. I'm assuming tax. It'll be about $250 for a Sony adapter to Z mount, and then maybe about $300-ish for an EF adapter, and then probably add $300 or $400 for a PL to Z mount adapter because I will want to use my Zuikos, which are EF. I will want to use an Ingenue EZ2 or Tokina primes, which are most likely PL or EF. And then I could also do the Red Z to PL adapter, which is $1,500, or go for the EVND for $3,000, but that's still way too much. I didn't even want to invest in that for my RF version. Or I could buy the Kipper tie mounts, but it's still the same conversation of proprietary. It's just tough because like $1,600 sounds good on paper, but now we're looking at like $2,500 plus, all said and done, because now I will have to sell my SIMOD PL to RF adapter. I have two Canon EF to RF adapters, and I'll have to get rid of my Fujinon because I don't think the Fujinon RF would work on the Z mount, or I can just revert it back to E mount. There's just so many things involved in this, and it's like for someone like me who has no interest in getting a Nikon camera, it's a really tough decision. Am I willing to spend $2,500 just to use Sony glass on my Komodo? And as of right now, it's like, no, like I don't need that. Like I'd rather use that $2,500 for a Sony lens for my camera, or buy an FX6, or use the $2,500 towards an Ingenue EZ2 or some cinema primes. And I really only enjoy using those native lenses on my FX3 and FX6 or the C70 with RF lenses, and that may change now with the Z mount, because if the Z mount is really solid with these Red cameras and the autofocus is reliable, and of course we have new performance and different customization things, this could be the new wave of using native lenses on cinema bodies like this that mostly weren't known for that. It's tough. Like I know some guys that are switching over, I know some guys that aren't. Right now it could be a good time to buy an RF mount camera, and it's like, will these cameras hold their resale value, or is it better just to keep your RF mount camera and then buy a Z mount Raptor if you have a Komodo X currently? It's hard to know this early, but it's still exciting nonetheless, and I'm sure in a handful of years down the road, like the whole trajectory of cinema cameras has probably shifted because of this moment between Nikon and Red. So of course we have to think about the long-term play. Red is notoriously known for upgrading their cameras often and making their previous cameras like kind of obsolete. And it's like people are still using DSMC1, DSMC2, but when you look at like how quickly the price dropped in the used market, it's really sad. Like cameras that used to be $60,000 and $80,000 are now going for like 5 to 10. And that could be a possibility in the next few years, of course, if Nikon and Red release the successors to the Komodo X and Raptor X, because they said that these two cameras are the first of their new Z Cinema series, and that could either be a Nikon cinema camera or a Red cinema camera. Like we just don't know unless you're watching this and you're on those two teams and you have all the inside deets. But if they're not gonna be releasing new cameras for a few years and they're just gonna be doing firmware updates to make these cameras better, if I was a current Nikon shooter and I wanted to be in that Nikon Z mount, like I would feel comfortable upgrading, because that's gonna make my whole workflow so much smoother and easier and give my camera more performance out of it, because of the implications of the Z mount and how much better it is with autofocus and customization and stuff. But as like a current RF owner, it's like if I'm adapting to EF and PL often, like there's really no point. Maybe in the used market, like the Z mount would sell easier than the RF, but I kind of doubt it because most people are using cinema lenses anyways. So it's just interesting all around. It's confusing, and this definitely could solidify Nikon as like a top dog in the cinema space. And they could also butcher red in this process and make red just fall by the wayside, and this could just be the end of red at some point if they just completely strip them away of everything. Like it's hard to tell. Like this is for sure like an interesting move by Nikon, and it's exciting to say the least. If the E-mount lenses work really well on the Z-mount body, I could see tons of Sony users start to add the Komodo X or Raptor into their camera kit. Being able to use all Sony lenses with your Komodo and FX3 and FX6 is going to be such a power move, but I have a feeling that Nikon's going to save that kind of workflow for their Z lenses. So I'm trying not to get my hopes up, but just one of those things, like right tool for the right job. Like if I want autofocus and that kind of performance, like I'm gonna be pulling an FX3 anyways, but yeah, it's hard to tell. So what do I recommend? I think if you're adapting to PL and EF all the time, you can go either way. If you can find one that's cheaper or more readily available, go that route. The RF mount is still solid. It's still a locking mount. There's still firmware updates happening for this camera, and it's really, really solid. But if you plan on using a hybrid stills camera and you're up in the air about it and you're maybe interested in buying a Nikon, go the Z mount. Like that'll make your life so much easier, having matching mounts that you can use your lenses across the board. And I'm sure the autofocus performance is actually going to be really solid out of those cameras. Or if you're like me who are on Komodo and Sony, like I could see it going either way. Like I just keep coming back to the thing of like, do I actually want to use Sony lenses on my Komodo X? Probably not. Like I love using cinema lenses or my vintage lenses, but like it all just depends on how they perform. And I know I said that so many times in this video, but it's like, it's just so hard to tell. It's so early, but like maybe if Sony lenses work really well, like that'd be nice to have that opportunity to use whatever Sony lenses they have. Like I guess primarily the telephoto zooms would be nice instead of investing into EF lenses. Like if you're a surf filmer, like Sony has a great 200 to 600 that like I know is really popular with the FX6 and FX3, but like I wouldn't want to buy that because I couldn't use it on my Komodo now. But if I had the Z mount, might as well. Like that'd be pretty sick. You just have to think, do you need autofocus? Do you need the Z mount? Do you care about Nikon cameras? Or are you just happy as just a current RF owner or someone who uses EF and PL? If you're a DSMC1 and DSMC2 operator and you want a new camera, this could be a good time to jump into the reds. And like, because they have that trade-in system, naturally you're trading in for the Z mount, which is like, that's cool. Like at least you're getting into the Raptor one way or another. And for the current Raptor owners, like you could do like the $12,000 to $15,000 upgrade into the X, but like I don't know if I would. Like I would upgrade to the Raptor X first for cheaper than upgrading to the X Z mount, if that makes sense. So yeah, there's a lot to sit and think about. Don't make any rash decisions. Like the RF mount is still really solid. These cameras crush. And if you're a potential new owner, like now you have an opportunity for an ecosystem. Like you have an easier time than the current owners to make a decision because you're investing the same amount of money that we invested into the RF mount up front. Now we have the initial investment plus the upgrade on top of the camera depreciating over the years. So if you're a new potential owner, like dude, go Z mount. Like there's no reason not to. It's the future for Red, it seems like, and the autofocus and customization, like it could be a really sweet thing for a lot of people. And if you end up going with the Z mount, now you have a proper B camera they could bring onto set and shoot side by side with it. Whereas for me, like I don't really have that with my FX3. Maybe if I had an XH2S that actually matches up really well, like I could do that. But like as of right now, it's like my FX3 is my backup camera on the jobs that I bring my Komodo to. Like I'm never bringing it out and shooting side by side just because the workflow isn't as streamlined as I like it to be. But for me, it's like I love my FX3 for other things that my Komodo can't do or has a hard time doing. So there's just so much nuance. It's going to depend from person to person. I'm a guy that loves cinema cameras, and mirrorless is just for specific types of jobs. And I know people who love having mirrorless cameras next to their cinema cameras on each job, and it all just depends. But you have to think about, like, you're buying a Red, you have to treat it like a Red. Don't buy a Red Raptor or Komodo X and expect it to be like an FX6 or C70 or C80 or C400. These cameras are still intentional and slower and more methodical, and the file sizes are pretty big. Like for most people out there, I'd still recommend the C80 or FX6 and just like run with that. Like especially with the whole native lens conversation, like those lenses will have better autofocus than the Komodo or Raptor X with a Z mount lens. Maybe that'll change in the next couple years, who knows? But as of right now, like I would 100% recommend something like an FX6 if you want like a solid run and gun package with autofocus. So yeah, as of now, I'm just curious to see what Nikon does. I think I'm just gonna chill with my Komodo X. Like I still think about the Raptor, but like there's just so much more involved in that with power draw and file sizes, and it's a much more expensive camera and it's heavier and bigger. Like the Komodo X is definitely the sweet spot for me right now, and it's already depreciated in price. Like I don't think I want to upgrade to Z mount and throw more money into it. Like I'm not really sure what the future of Red is, and like if Red's out the door in a couple years, like I might end up full Sony or wait and save up for an Arri. Like it's hard to tell at this point. So I think right now I'm just gonna hunker down, keep crushing it with my Komodo, keep shooting with it, and just see what the future holds. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know that was a long-winded one, but there's a lot more to be seen out of Nikon and Red, and I'm stoked for my buddies that shoot on Nikon and Red, because like I know they're going to be so psyched on this whole ecosystem, and I'm just hoping that this whole Nikon Red thing makes the FX3 and FX6 Mark IIs something that I could see myself selling my Komodo for. Like I want those cameras to be so freaking good for the money that like it would make it hard to justify the Komodo. Even though I love my Komodo and I'll keep it, like I just want them to be that good. And I think these brands are going to start feeling the pressure from Nikon, especially because Nikon's such a powerhouse in the industry. They have so much money. They have money for research and development. They've been around the block so many times, but they are new to the cinema space, which is a little concerning for Red owners. Because like if they completely screw up Red, like there goes Red. But at least you'll have a sick Nikon Z8 or Z9 with R3D at some point. It's like a dystopian future. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any questions about Nikon Red or Sony or anything, feel free to leave those down below, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.